Welcome to Learn This Game, where you can learn about board games and how they are played. Today, we'll be looking at Deep Space D-6. In this video, there'll be a general description and overview of the game. We'll inventory the components, and we'll go through gameplay, including setup, a couple of sample turns, and victory conditions. In the description, there'll be some helpful links. There's also a timestamp index so you can navigate directly to any part of the presentation. If you want to skip this introduction and go straight to the setup and gameplay, you can go to the timestamp index now in the description. And if you find this video helpful, please like, subscribe, and share. And you can also leave a comment to let us know what game you'd like to see reviewed, or if you have this game, share your opinion. Deep Space D6 was published by Tower Leader Games in 2015 and designed by Tony Go. In this solitaire dice game, you are the captain of a starship attempting to survive a series of threats in deep space. The age recommendation is 14 and older. During game setup, we'll review how to change the difficulty level and length of a game session. Each game averages about 30 minutes to play. The game is designed for one player. There are no multiplayer variants. An app is not required to play, and there is no app assistance. There are also no official apps for the game. There is one expansion called The Endless that has 54 cards including new threats, ship upgrades, and a new final encounter. Armada is a standalone multiplayer sequel for 1 to 4 players. Now that you've seen a brief introduction to the game, let's get into the game itself. Deep Space D6 is a solitaire worker placement game using dice, boards, and mini-cards. Thematically, the game has a science fiction theme that is set in deep space where you are the captain of a starship that you must protect while you defeat all oncoming threats. Now let's see how to win the game. You will be the captain of one starship. To win, you must satisfy 3 conditions. First, you have to have at least 1 hull point. Second, the threat deck must be emptied. And third, all external threats must be destroyed. External threats are marked with a red triangle. Now let's review the components. Deep Space D6 comes with a 12-page black and white rulebook, 1 double-sided infirmary card, 4 mounted shipboards, 2 cubes to track hull and shield points, 1 6-sided threat die, and 6 6-sided dice that act as the crew you'll be placing throughout the game. Each die has all 6 crew icons. And finally, there are 54 threat cards that include external threats, internal threats, and more. Now let's set up the game for our first playthrough. First, we'll select one starship. We select the Halcyon, which is recommended for new players. We place the board in the center of the play area. Next, we'll set the gray and green cubes on the highest numbers of the hull and shield meters respectively. We will set the infirmary card to the side. We will select the side without the special text, which would allow the crew to perform any action at the cost of sending a crew member to the infirmary. We will set the 6 crew dice and the black threat die to the side. Next, we'll shuffle the threat cards and place the threat deck aside. When we set up the threat deck, we can make 2 modifications to the deck and then determine how we'll set up the final encounter. First, we can change the difficulty level. There are 6 Don't Panic cards that provide a break from the oncoming threats. Removing panic cards increases the difficulty level. So if you want to increase the difficulty level to hard, for example, you would remove 5 Don't Panic cards, leaving just 1 in the threat deck. You can also make the game shorter or longer. After shuffling the threat deck, you would then remove the number of cards per the following chart. We then decide how we'll set up the final encounter. The final encounter is called the Ouroboros and consists of 6 external threat cards with a special symbol in the lower right corner of each card. First, we can set all 6 cards aside or at the bottom of the threat deck so we encounter the Ouroboros at the end of the game. Or we can shuffle the 6 cards into the threat deck so when we encounter one during the game, that card is set aside and another threat card is drawn. When the 6th Ouroboros card is drawn during the game, all 6 cards are then deployed along the damage track in addition to any external threats already in play. This means the final encounter can actually be confronted anytime during the game if all 6 cards are drawn before the threat deck is exhausted. For this game, we'll set the cards at the bottom of the deck so we encounter the Ouroboros at the end of the game. Finally, we'll keep the last page of the rulebook near since it shows the round sequence. Now let's see how the game is played. We will go through 2 sample rounds to show how each step is completed. First, we draw 2 cards from the threat deck to start the game. The red triangles indicate the cards are external threats. External threats are placed on the right side of the board next to the section of the board that matches the threat card's health points. The number in the red triangle on the card indicates how many damage points that card must take before it is defeated and discarded. The game is played in rounds, and each round has 6 steps. Let's start with the first step, which is to roll all of the crew dice. When we roll the crew dice, we must immediately take any threat dice and place them in the threat area. In this case, we have 1 to place. In step 2, if the scanners are full, we would draw a threat card and place the threat dice onto the returned area of the infirmary card to be re-rolled on the next turn. For this ship, the scanners are considered full when 3 threat dice are placed. Each ship may have different scanner capacities. In step 3, we can assign our crew dice to the different areas of the ship. We can employ our crew dice in any order we wish. It is possible that some crew may not be assigned. Let's first assign the medical crew. This allows us to either return all units from the infirmary or return a threat die to the returned area on the infirmary card. Crew that are in the infirmary are not available to be gathered in step 6 and therefore cannot be used during the next turn. Since we do not have any crew in the infirmary, we can return a threat die to the returned area and will be able to gather this die in step 6. Next, let's assign our 2 tactical dice. Per the instructions on the shipboard, the first die causes 1 damage and each additional die causes 2 damage each. The total damage may be split among multiple targets. So in this case, we have a total of 3 damage we can inflict on the external threats. The Raider's card has 2 health points. We can employ 2 damage to this threat. As external threats receive damage, they are moved down the damage track. When they move off the board, they are discarded. Since the Raider's threat only has 2 health points, we can move it down 2 points, which means it can be removed from the board and discarded. We still have 1 damage we can inflict, so we will target the remaining Interceptor card and move it 1 space down on the damage track. In future rounds, we will need to inflict 2 more damage to destroy this threat. Next, let's assign the Commander die. This die allows us to change the face of any 1 crew die. We have 1 engineering die remaining. Since we do not need to repair the hull at this time, we can convert this die to a tactical die and add 2 damage to the remaining external threat. Since the Interceptor only has 2 health remaining, this threat can be moved down 2 spaces and discarded. We will now not have to wait for a future round to destroy this threat. In step 4, we draw a new threat card from the threat deck. We draw an external threat with 1 health and place it at 1 on the damage track. In step 5, we roll the black threat die. In this case, we roll a 4. We activate all threats that match the face of the threat die. Threat cards are activated from left to right starting at the top. Internal threats are completed before external threats. In this case, the external threat is activated by a die roll of 2 or 4. As indicated on the bottom of the threat card, this threat inflicts 1 damage to our ship. Unless the card instructs to bypass the shields, any hull damage is first applied to the shields. Since this card was activated by the roll of 4, we will move the shield marker down 1 space. In the final step, we gather all available crew dice to roll for the next round. We gather the assigned crew and any dice that were set aside. Crew in the infirmary, scanners, away missions, or distracted threats are not gathered. If we are unable to gather at least 1 crew die, we lose the game. We now start the next round by rolling the available crew dice. In this round, we're able to roll all 6 dice. We immediately place any threat dice in the scanners. Since there are only 2 threats, we do not have to draw a threat card. Next, we assign the remaining crew dice. We can use the medical die to remove 1 threat die. Since we do not have any hull damage or commander dice to change the current crew dice, we can disregard the engineering dice. We can then use the remaining green science crew to either recharge the shields or apply a stasis beam. We apply a stasis beam to the current external threat by placing the crew die on the threat card. This prevents the external threat from being activated for the current round. The science die will be gathered at the end of the round in step 6. Next, we draw a new threat card. The red square indicates this is an internal threat. Internal threats are placed to the left of the shipboard. If this threat is activated, we will have to send 1 crew to the infirmary. The bottom right shows it will require 1 engineering crew die to eliminate this internal threat. We proceed to the next step and roll a 4 on the threat die. First, we check the internal threat, but the robot rising threat is not activated. Next, we check the external threat, which is activated by a 2 or 4. Although we rolled a 4, the stasis beam prevents any effect this round. We then go to the final step and gather all available crew dice. In this round, we remove all the crew including the stasis beam, but leave the threat die in the scanner at the top of the shipboard. This will leave us with only 5 crew dice to roll next turn. This concludes the sample playthrough. These sample rounds should give you a good idea about how the game is played. All internal threats and some external threats have the option to perform away missions. If there are crew symbols on the bottom right of the card, you may assign the designated crew to complete the threat. For away mission threats that have 2 crew requirements, you may place 1 crew in 1 round, and then consider it locked in to save it for another round when you can place another crew on the card. At the beginning of this game, we set aside the 6 Ouroboros cards that were marked by the special symbol at the bottom right corner of each card. When the threat deck is completed, we would place all 6 cards into play as external threats. To win the game, you will need to destroy all external threats before your hull reaches 0, or you do not have any available crew left to assign. Let's review the winning and losing conditions of the game. To win, you must satisfy 3 conditions. Have at least 1 hull point, the threat deck is empty, and all external threats are destroyed. Recall that external threats are marked with a red triangle. You lose the game if you do not have at least 1 crew die to roll, or your hull points reach 0 before you defeat all of the external threats. This concludes this review of Deep Space D-6. Visit us at these sites and don't forget to leave a comment to share your experience with the game, or to let us know what games you would like to see reviewed and played. And if you'd like to experience something greater than surviving deep space threats, stick around for our disclaimer. Coming up next.